Retired Admiral Jack Mitchell had dreamed of the day he could unwind aboard his 50-foot schooner, Phoenix. After decades of service, he traded his uniform for salty sea breezes and anchored in Charleston Harbor. As dawn's first light turned the water to gold, Jack plotted a 2-hour sail and packed iced tea and snacks, eager to shed landlocked worries. But stepping onto the pier, a sharp voice shattered the calm. "Marla, the neighborhood watchdog," her gaze locked on his deck keys. "Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more adventures." Captain Frank Douglas had long dreamed of the day he could finally relax on his beloved yacht, the Invincible. After years of hard work and dedication, his retirement had allowed him to purchase his dream vessel and settle into a peaceful life along Charleston Harbor. That morning, as the sun painted the water in hues of gold and orange, Frank eagerly prepared for a day of leisurely sailing and fishing. He had meticulously planned every detail, from the route he would take along the sparkling coastline to the light refreshments he'd pack on board, hoping to leave behind the stresses of his previous career. But just as Frank was about to step out onto the dock, a familiar disturbance shattered his reverie. As he approached his yacht, he noticed a woman standing near the gangway with a determined, almost confrontational look. It wasn't long before he recognized her as Karen, a notorious figure in the neighborhood known for her meddling and sharp tongue. In that instant, Frank's excitement was replaced by a sinking feeling of foreboding. "Good morning," Frank began, his voice calm despite the unease churning in his stomach. "Can I help you?" Karen's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, her gaze fixed not on him but on his prized vessel. "I couldn't help but notice your car keys hanging near your yacht," she said in a tone that mixed curiosity with authority. "I was just admiring them, but it seems a bit odd to leave something so valuable unattended." Her words carried an accusatory lilt that belied the casual content of her statement. Frank's heart skipped a beat. The keys in question were a set of specially forged copies meant only for him, symbolic of the years he had invested in securing his freedom on the water. He frowned, sensing that Karen's motives were not as benign as they appeared. "These keys belong to the Invincible, and they're under my strict control," he replied evenly. "I work hard for what I have, and I trust that my property is safe." But Karen was not so easily placated. With an air of self-importance, she continued, "I'm not so sure about that. In this community, we all look out for one another. If you're not careful about how you handle your valuables, it can hurt us all. I might have to report this to the HOA if I see something amiss." Her eyes flashed with a mix of indignation and superiority as if she were the final arbiter of neighborhood propriety. Frank's pulse quickened. He had hoped that moving into a serene waterfront community would mean a fresh start, but now it seemed that his new life was already being compromised by a nosy neighbor. He struggled to maintain his composure as he considered the implications of her words, especially since he had worked so hard to achieve this dream. Realizing that this encounter was just the beginning of a potential series of disputes, Frank steadied himself. "I assure you, everything here is above board," he said, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'm happy to share my documentation if needed, but rest assured, my yacht and I are perfectly in line with all community standards." As Karen's eyes glittered with skepticism, Frank stepped away toward the gangway, determined to start his day on the water despite the interruption. Though the morning had taken an unexpected turn, he knew that maintaining calm and addressing any false claims with clear evidence would be his best course of action. With the salty breeze in his face and a resolve to not let petty challenges ruin his new beginning, Frank embarked on his journey, prepared to face whatever the day might bring. Chief Bartholomew "Bad Bart" Johnson was looking forward to a serene day at Bayview Marina, preparing for a relaxing fishing trip aboard his beloved yacht, the Intimidator. That morning, as he strolled along the dock with a sense of quiet satisfaction, he noticed Karen lingering near his boat. Dressed in a sharply tailored outfit and wearing an air of self-importance, she eyed the set of keys hanging from his jacket, a set that Bart always reserved for special occasions. "Good morning," Bart said in his steady, measured tone, attempting to sound both welcoming and authoritative. However, Karen's expression hardened as she stepped closer. I couldn't help but notice these keys are just lying there, she declared. I'm concerned they might fall into the wrong hands, and I wouldn't want property values to suffer in this neighborhood. Bart's heart sank. He knew that Karen fancied herself a guardian of community standards, though her methods were questionable. These keys belong to me, he explained calmly. I purchased the Intimidator years ago. They're not for public display or free distribution. Yet Karen was relentless. That may be your story, she retorted, but until you can prove it to the HOA, I must assume otherwise. At that moment, a young officer, Officer Ramirez, approached with cautious interest. His presence only added to the tension. Bart continued, I have all my documentation with me. I'd be happy to show you if that will ease your mind. But Karen sneered, I don't need your papers, I need to see that you're not hiding something. Officer Ramirez frowned slightly, glancing between Bart and Karen, unsure whose side to take. Bart's tone remained measured, his eyes steady. I assure you, officer, I'm the lawful owner of the Intimidator. I work hard for everything I have, and my home is no exception. Despite the calm in Bart's voice, Karen's insistence grew. She waved her phone in his direction as if capturing evidence for later, and murmured that she'd report him to the HOA board for suspicious behavior. The conversation continued with hushed tension echoing across the marina. Bart's patience wavered as he realized that Karen's intrusions were not a one-time misunderstanding but part of a pattern of petty, yet persistent, harassment. By the time the brief standoff ended, Karen storming off with a final, disdainful glance and Officer Ramirez trailing behind, uncertain, the tranquility of Bayview Marina had been shattered. Bart, though frustrated, resolved to document the encounter further, determined to protect his rights as a homeowner. With a heavy heart and a firm grip on his keys, he stepped away from the dock, already bracing for the inevitable repercussions that would come when the HOA got involved. In the upscale community of Ocean Crest Quay, Darius Knight, a proud new homeowner, was excited about settling into his elegantly restored colonial house. But his joy was soon marred by an unexpected confrontation with his neighbor, Karen. Unlike the quiet introduction he'd hoped for, Karen appeared at his front door with a stormy expression and a haphazard stack of papers in her hand. Are you sure you belong here? She demanded, her tone laced with suspicion. Darius, taken aback, explained, I purchased this house last year. Every document is in order. He produced a thick folder from his side table, containing the deed, the title report, and bank statements verifying the sale. But Karen's eyes narrowed as she snatched a page from the folder. This doesn't look right to me, she huffed, waving the document as if it were a warning flag. Before Darius could respond, her phone buzzed loudly in her hand. I'm calling 911, Karen declared, her voice trembling with false indignation. This man is trespassing and hiding something from the HOA. In that moment, Darius's heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief. He watched as Karen hurriedly pressed the call button, her face contorting with indignation. A few neighbors peered through curtained windows as the commotion unfolded. Darius, determined to set the record straight, pulled out his smartphone and began recording the scene. I'm not a trespasser, I'm the owner, he said steadily, letting the camera capture his calm demeanor alongside the visibly shaken Karen. The footage, he knew, would be critical if her claims reached the HOA board. Moments later, a local patrol car approached. Officer Daniels stepped out and asked, what seems to be the problem? Darius recounted the events, showing the officer his folder of official documents. As he explained, the officer's skeptical frown slowly gave way to understanding. Everything appears in order, Officer Daniels remarked, nodding as he examined the paperwork. Karen, meanwhile, continued to wave her phone, her protests growing more incoherent. I'm protecting the neighborhood, she insisted. But her words rang hollow when faced with the clear evidence in Darius's hand. There is no basis for these accusations, Darius said quietly. I've done nothing wrong. The confrontation left Darius with a sense of disillusionment. He had anticipated some curiosity from his neighbors, but not this public spectacle that questioned his very right to be at home. As Officer Daniels left, promising to report the incident, Karen stormed off with a final glare at the recording device. Darius stood on his front step, the weight of the moment sinking in. Though his property was secure, the emotional toll of being publicly accused of trespassing gnawed at him. With determination, he vowed that the truth, backed by documented evidence, would eventually restore his reputation and reaffirm his rightful place in the community. In the upscale coastal enclave of Seabreeze Landing, Garrett Summers had just finished unpacking and settling into his newly acquired estate, a beautiful villa overlooking the marina. His days of hard work had finally paid off, and he looked forward to a quiet life of leisure and celebration with his family. However, that tranquility was abruptly shattered one crisp morning when his door swung open to reveal a familiar, yet unwelcome, presence, Karen. Garrett had only been in his new home for a few days when Karen, a notorious neighborhood busybody, arrived unannounced. Dressed in a sharply pressed blouse and exuding an air of self-righteous authority, Karen strode into the foyer with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. "Good morning," she said icily, as if addressing a delinquent tenant rather than the rightful owner. "I'm here to inform you that your occupancy does not meet the standards of Seabreeze Landing." Taken aback, Garrett adjusted his stance. "I purchased this villa last month," he explained, voice steady despite the rising tension. "I have all the documents to prove my ownership." He motioned to a sleek, black folder resting on a console table, the deed and mortgage papers neatly arranged. But Karen's eyes flashed with indignation. "That's what you say, but the HOA records have not been updated. Until then, I must assume you're merely renting this property. And if that's the case, you're in violation of community rules." Before Garrett could protest, Karen produced a printed violation notice from her clipboard. The notice, printed on thin paper with bold letters proclaiming unauthorized occupancy, falsely accused him of delinquent rent payments and improper use of communal resources. "This is serious," she declared, voice rising. "I have already notified the HOA, and legal action will follow if you do not rectify this immediately." Garrett's heart pounded. His dreams of a peaceful new beginning were suddenly mired in conflict over a document that was entirely fabricated. "I assure you," he said, trying to keep his tone calm, "I own this property, and I'm not renting. I can provide verified records from the county clerk if necessary." But Karen's face hardened as she snapped, "I'm not waiting for bureaucracy to catch up with you. You must sign a lease agreement immediately and pay the delinquent rent." Her words, absurd and insulting, hung in the air like a challenge. Garrett's jaw tightened. "I'm not signing any lease. This is my home, legally purchased with my own hard-earned money." His voice grew firm as he continued, "I refuse to be extorted by false claims. I demand that you retract your accusations and cease harassing me." At that moment, a subtle murmur rippled through the house as a neighbor, who had been discreetly watching from behind a partially open door, stepped forward. The neighbor's presence added weight to Garrett's words, hinting that others in Seabreeze Landing were aware of Karen's penchant for petty extortion. Karen's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Garrett's tone softened slightly. "I understand that you're concerned about community standards," he said, "but these standards cannot justify misrepresenting facts or intimidating new homeowners. I am more than willing to work with the HOA to update records and ensure everything complies with community guidelines, but I will not be bullied into signing or paying something I do not owe." Her face reddened with anger. "You'll regret this, Mr. Summers," Karen spat. "The HOA will hear all about it, and your violations will be made public." With a dismissive wave, she turned and marched from the foyer, leaving behind the faint echo of her threats and the unsettling sound of her clipboard thudding against the floor. Garrett stood silent for a long moment, the cool air of Seabreeze Landing now feeling charged with unresolved tension. He gathered his documents, his mind racing through his next steps. Though the confrontation had ended abruptly, he knew that this was only the beginning of a drawn-out battle over his rightful place in the community. Determined not to let baseless accusations tarnish his new start, he resolved to work diligently with the HOA, provide all necessary evidence, and, if required, take legal action to protect his ownership and reputation. With renewed resolve, Garrett tucked the folder under his arm and stepped out onto the porch. The sunrise over the marina served as a quiet reminder that despite the turbulence, each new day brought fresh hope, and the strength to stand up for the truth. The following day, Marcus Ellison awoke to find an envelope lying on his front step at Meadowbrook Court. With cautious hands, he opened it and discovered a violation notice that accused him of unauthorized occupancy and alleged delinquent rent fees, even though he had recently purchased his home outright. The official-looking paper, complete with a seal and a reference number, was as baffling as it was infuriating. Marcus immediately suspected that the source of this absurd notice was none other than his meddling neighbor, Karen. Known for her self-appointed role as a guardian of neighborhood propriety, Karen had previously confronted him about everything from stray lawn ornaments to misplaced packages. Now, she was taking things a step further by claiming that he was living there illegally. The violation notice not only questioned his ownership but threatened legal action if he did not rectify what it deemed an occupancy irregularity. Furious yet composed, Marcus hurried inside to gather his proof. He retrieved his property deed, mortgage statements, and all relevant documents that clearly established his legal ownership of the home at Meadowbrook Court. As he spread them out on his kitchen table, he couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. Who would dare question his hard-earned success? Not long after, Karen reappeared on his front lawn, this time brandishing a clipboard. With a haughty expression, she glared at him. "You need to sign a lease agreement immediately," she declared, her tone laced with condescension. "Until your ownership is verified by the HOA, you're nothing more than a renter, and you must pay the rent due." Her demand was as ludicrous as it was insulting. Marcus had bought the house, and no lease was ever required. Marcus's heart pounded, but he met her challenge with a calm firmness. "I'm not renting this home," he said, his voice steady despite the anger that simmered beneath. "I own it outright, and I have the documents to prove it." He gestured to the neat stack of papers on the table, each one a testament to his legal right to live there. Karen scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" "It looks like you're trying to pull a fast one," she retorted, waving her clipboard as if it were a badge of authority. "I've already reported this to the HOA, and they will be coming to investigate. I'll make sure they know every violation you've committed." At that, Marcus felt a mixture of frustration and determination. He'd anticipated some meddling from Karen, but this was crossing a line. With careful deliberation, he reached for his phone and began recording the exchange. "For the record," he said, "I have all my documentation, and there is no lease to sign. I expect you to retract your demands." Karen's eyes flashed, but she refused to yield. "I'll be watching you, and if you don't comply, you'll face legal consequences," she warned. Her words, full of bluster, did little to shake Marcus's resolve. He maintained his steady tone as he repeated, "I'm the owner, and these documents prove it. The HOA will have no grounds for further complaints once they see the evidence." Just then, a passing car signaled the arrival of Officer Saunders, who had come in response to Karen's earlier report. He approached with a measured gait, glancing at the recorded conversation on Marcus's phone. After a brief review, Officer Saunders nodded. "Mr. Ellison, everything appears to be in order," he confirmed, handing back the phone. "I suggest you file a report with the HOA if you wish, but your ownership is not in question." Karen, who had been watching from a short distance, scowled as she clutched her clipboard tighter. "This isn't over," she muttered, before turning and stalking off down the driveway. Marcus stood silently, his pulse finally calming. The violation notice, the extortion attempt, and the unwanted intrusion had all been laid bare by clear documentation. Though the confrontation had marred what should have been a celebratory day, it also reaffirmed his right to live peacefully in his own home. With his property papers secured in his briefcase and his determination renewed, Marcus returned inside, resolute that the truth would ultimately silence the petty claims of a meddlesome neighbor. Dominic Reeves had expected a quiet afternoon at his new home on Sunset Bay, a reward for years of perseverance. But when he returned from a quick errand, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door, which he'd always locked, now sat ajar, and an unsettling chill crept over him as he stepped inside. The hallway, usually arranged with family photos and carefully placed mementos, now felt invaded. It didn't take long for Dominic to discover the source of his dismay. In the living room, amid scattered boxes of wedding decorations for his brother Travis's upcoming celebration, sat Karen. She lounged casually on his sofa, a half-full glass of red wine in her hand, and a look of smug satisfaction on her face. Her posture screamed defiance as she sipped as though this were her own home. "Dominic," she began with false cheer, "I'm so sorry you're back. I just thought the house was abandoned, so I—" Her words cut off as Dominic stepped forward, shock and fury mingling in his eyes. "Abandoned?" he repeated, incredulously. "This is my home. I've been here for weeks, and I've done nothing but settle in." Before he could demand an explanation, Karen shrugged dismissively. "I'm simply making sure nothing goes to waste. A house left empty invites trouble, you know." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if she believed that only someone irresponsible would leave their home so vulnerable. Dominic's mind raced. He recalled that just yesterday he'd received a notice from the HOA accusing him of unauthorized occupancy and delinquent rent fees. Now, here was Karen, emboldened to not only claim his keys but also to change his locks entirely. The intrusion felt personal, a deliberate act to undermine his hard-won security. Determined to reclaim control, Dominic strode toward the front door and reached for the new lock, his fingers trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Before he could act further, the sound of a vehicle approaching signaled the arrival of Officer Vega. The officer's car pulled up slowly, lights off, as if he were called in on a routine matter. Vega stepped out, scanning the scene with a steady gaze. "Mr. Reeves," Officer Vega said, approaching cautiously, "I received a report that someone was on your property and causing disturbances." Dominic's heart pounded, but he forced a calm tone. "That report was based on false accusations. I am the homeowner. I have all the documents to prove it," he replied, gesturing toward the neatly stored folder on a side table. Karen's eyes darted between Dominic and the officer. "I was only trying to protect the property," she insisted, though her voice wavered as she clutched her wine glass. Officer Vega nodded. "I'll need to verify your ownership, sir." Dominic promptly produced his deed and registration papers, the official stamps clear and unambiguous. As Officer Vega flipped through the documents, his expression shifted from uncertainty to understanding. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Reeves," he finally said, handing the papers back. He then turned to Karen. "Ms. Karen, you entered this home without permission, changed the locks, and now claim it was abandoned. That constitutes a serious violation," Officer Vega stated firmly. Karen's face twisted, and she sputtered an incoherent reply. I thought," she began, but Officer Vega cut her off. "If you believe you have any right to interfere, you must do so through proper channels. For now, I must note this as an unauthorized entry." He scribbled a few notes in his pad and gave Dominic a sympathetic nod. Dominic exhaled slowly, feeling a measure of vindication amid the chaos. Though the situation was far from resolved, the intervention of Officer Vega had momentarily halted Karen's reckless behavior. As the officer departed with a warning for Karen to cease further interference, Dominic retrieved his keys and inspected the new lock, now a symbol of the day's turmoil. He knew that the HOA might soon be involved, and that Karen's actions would require formal redress. For now, however, Dominic resolved to secure his home further and document every detail of this encounter. With his family's wedding on the horizon and his sense of security restored just a bit, he retreated inside, determined to let facts and evidence speak for him, even as the memory of Karen's intrusion lingered. As the tension in his home at Marina Bay reached a fever pitch, Quentin Q. Bellamy realized it was time to end the farce. Earlier that day, after confronting his meddlesome neighbor, Karen, about her unauthorized lock change and extortionate demands, things had escalated quickly. Now, with sirens in the distance and a growing crowd of curious onlookers along the dock, Karen had taken her campaign one step further by calling the police, again. Quentin listened as his phone rang, the 911 call blaring from Karen's end. According to her frantic report, a suspicious man was allegedly trespassing in her own apartment and threatening her safety. Her voice, thick with contrived fear, painted a picture of a dangerous criminal on the loose. But Quentin, known not only as a successful homeowner but also as a former FBI agent, was prepared for such exaggerations. He calmly stepped forward and activated his camera, determined to record every detail. Moments later, Officer Delgado arrived at the scene. His eyes scanned the chaos, a disheveled front door, scattered wedding boxes, and Karen's phone still clutched tightly in her hand. With measured authority, Delgado called out, "Sir, please step forward. We received a report of trespassing and threats." Quentin's gaze hardened. He stepped into view, his stance relaxed but resolute. Before anyone could speak, Quentin said, "I'm not trespassing, I own this property." He then reached into his jacket and produced his FBI credentials, holding them clearly for the officer to see. The reaction was immediate. Officer Delgado's expression shifted from uncertainty to astonishment as he read the badge. "Mr. Bellamy, is that correct?" he asked, his voice a mix of professional curiosity and respect. Quentin nodded. "Yes, and here's my property deed, too." He pulled out a leather-bound folder from his briefcase and handed it to Delgado, who carefully flipped through the pages. The documents bore all the official stamps, confirming Quentin's status as the rightful owner of the home at Marina Bay. The crowd, now hushed, watched the exchange with a mixture of awe and relief. Karen, who had been filming moments earlier, now tried to interject. "You're lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "I saw you near my apartment, this is all a setup." But Officer Delgado, having seen the evidence, turned his attention firmly on Karen. "Ms. Karen, based on the documents and Mr. Bellamy's credentials, it's clear that he is the legal owner," he stated. His tone left no room for further argument. At that moment, Quentin felt a surge of vindication. The carefully constructed facade of deception that Karen had built was crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. His eyes flicked to the onlooking neighbors, many of whom nodded in silent approval. Officer Delgado then advised, "I must file this incident. Ms. Karen, you will be questioned regarding your 911 call and false allegations. Consider this a warning." Karen's face contorted in anger and disbelief as she realized her charade had failed. Without further protest, she backed away, the glint of her phone's camera fading as the officer guided her off the property. Meanwhile, Quentin allowed himself a small, measured smile. The ordeal, which had threatened to ruin his new beginning, was now decisively over. Lenny Bellamy, his brother, arrived shortly after, and the two exchanged a look of mutual relief. With Officer Delgado's intervention, the community now recognized that the truth could not be so easily obscured by baseless claims. Quentin turned to the gathered neighbors, thanking them for their support, and assured them that all would soon be set right with the HOA and local authorities. As the red and blue lights faded into the distance, Quentin felt a renewed sense of peace. He gathered his documents and his phone, ready to move forward with his plans for a peaceful life at Marina Bay. Despite the tumult of the day, he knew that standing firm in truth and evidence was the only way to build a secure future, one that no petty, vindictive neighbor could ever threaten. In the wake of the confrontation at Harborview Estates, the incident quickly spread across social media. Videos captured by onlookers showed Elias Monroe calmly displaying his official documents and FBI credentials, effectively debunking Karen's wild allegations. Posts and hashtags emerged, with many residents expressing relief that justice had prevailed. The narrative was clear: an intrusive neighbor had tried to label a law-abiding homeowner as a trespasser, only to be exposed by indisputable evidence. Local blogs and community forums buzzed with discussion. "Elias Monroe is a real hero," one post read, while another titled, "When a Neighbor Crosses the Line," recounted the episode in detail. Officer Ramirez's professionalism was praised too, with several comments noting how calmly he handled the situation despite the chaotic 911 call. In a matter of hours, what began as a petty dispute had morphed into a symbol of accountability and community solidarity. In the days following, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted noticeably. Residents who had once whispered doubts about Elias's right to be there now approached him with supportive nods. A local newspaper ran a brief article highlighting the incident, emphasizing the importance of evidence over unfounded claims. The report also mentioned that the HOA board would review its protocols in light of the incident, aiming to prevent such manipulative behavior in the future. Elias himself felt a sense of vindication, though he remained modest about it. "I never set out to be a hero," he said in a follow-up interview with a community reporter. "I only wanted to secure my home and live peacefully." His measured tone and clear evidence of property ownership resonated with many, and his reputation in Harborview Estates grew stronger as a result. Even Karen's own supporters began to question her tactics. A few admitted that her constant complaints had grown tiresome and that her exaggerations did more harm than good. The police report, now circulating in the community, made it clear that her actions had legal consequences. As Officer Ramirez confirmed Elias's ownership and reassured residents that false reports would be taken seriously, a feeling of relief spread throughout the neighborhood. In the midst of this renewed peace, Elias resumed his daily routine with a cautious optimism. He spent his mornings on the porch, watching as neighbors waved cheerfully, and he felt a renewed sense of belonging in Harborview Estates. Though the scars of the confrontation remained, the experience had sparked a movement toward greater transparency and fairness. For many, Elias's calm insistence on truth had become a rallying cry, an example that one should always document, verify, and stand up for one's rights. By the end of the week, the once divisive incident had transformed into a lesson for the entire community. Social media users compiled, before and after, snapshots of the event, and even local officials commended Officer Ramirez and Elias for their restraint. With the neighborhood united against falsehoods, Harborview Estates began to feel like the welcoming place it was meant to be. As the dust settled over the dramatic incident at Crestview Gardens, news of Karen's arrest spread rapidly throughout the community. Marcus Ellison, who had endured repeated false accusations and intrusive behavior from Karen, found himself at the center of a story that quickly became the talk of the town. Videos captured by bystanders showed her frantic 911 call and her panicked demeanor as officers arrived to detain her. Officer Vega, who had been on the scene, later confirmed that the evidence overwhelmingly supported Marcus's claims. "There's no doubt that Mr. Ellison is the rightful owner of his home," he stated in a brief press conference. The documents and video footage leave no room for misinterpretation. These words resonated with the residents of Crestview Gardens, many of whom had grown weary of Karen's constant harassment. Social media buzzed with reactions, posts praising Marcus's calm and rational demeanor and calls for accountability against those who abuse power. Neighbors who once hesitated to speak up now found their voices. A local community forum erupted with stories of other incidents where Karen's meddling had disrupted daily life, and soon, a petition circulated demanding that the HOA review its complaint procedures. For Marcus, the outcome felt bittersweet. While Karen's arrest brought a sense of relief and vindication, it also served as a stark reminder of how easily one individual's malice could disrupt the peace of an entire neighborhood. "I never wanted any of this," Marcus remarked in a quiet interview, "but I will not be bullied or painted as a criminal on my own property." The HOA eventually issued a formal apology to Marcus for initially siding with Karen's unfounded claims. In an effort to restore harmony, the board pledged to revise its policies, ensuring that future complaints would be thoroughly verified before any action was taken. For many residents, this was a turning point, a collective step toward a more just and supportive community. As for Karen, she was held accountable for filing a false police report, and her reputation began to crumble rapidly. Neighbors who had once tolerated her overzealous behavior now openly expressed relief that she was no longer in a position to bully others. Although some expressed sympathy for her eventual downfall, the overwhelming sentiment was one of satisfaction at the restoration of order. Marcus continued to receive supportive messages from throughout Crestview Gardens, and his story became a local symbol of perseverance and fairness. By the time the legal proceedings advanced, it was clear that the tide had turned. The community now stood firmly behind him, and those who had once lived in fear of Karen's unbridled authority were now emboldened to speak out. The shared experience not only vindicated Marcus but also paved the way for stronger neighborhood bonds and more responsible management by the HOA. Weeks after the tumultuous events at Sunset Grove, life began to settle into a peaceful rhythm for Dr. Caleb Monroe. The confrontation with Karen had left a lasting mark on the community, one that spurred both legal action and a broader reassessment of neighborhood values. With Karen now facing charges for filing a false report and other related offenses, the atmosphere in Sunset Grove slowly shifted from tension to cautious optimism. Dr. Monroe, who had once endured relentless harassment from Karen, now enjoyed the supportive nods and friendly greetings of his neighbors. The local HOA, embarrassed by its initial missteps, formally apologized to him and swiftly moved to remove the discriminatory policies that had allowed Karen's unchecked behavior. In a meeting that drew a record number of residents, the board vowed to implement stricter verification procedures and to ensure that every complaint was thoroughly investigated before any action was taken. Gabriel Monroe, Caleb's brother, arrived at the family home for the long-anticipated wedding reception. Amid the decorations and the laughter of relatives, the dark cloud of recent events began to lift. Neighbors, who had once whispered about Karen's outrageous claims, now openly congratulated Caleb on standing up for his rights. Social media buzzed with supportive hashtags and positive stories celebrating his resilience. Officer Chen, who had played a crucial role in exposing Karen's deceit, visited Caleb's home to offer a personal apology on behalf of the police department. Dr. Monroe, he said sincerely, we regret the initial confusion and any distress you experienced. We are committed to ensuring that such incidents never happen again. His words, though measured, reinforced the community's newfound trust in local law enforcement. As the wedding reception unfolded, Sunset Grove's residents felt a renewed sense of unity. The scandal had transformed from a personal battle into a collective lesson, that vigilance, clear documentation, and a willingness to stand up for one's rights can turn even the most toxic situations around. In a symbolic act of closure, a local nonprofit purchased Karen's old property and repurposed it as a community center, a beacon of hope and a testament to the neighborhood's commitment to fairness and compassion. Late that evening, as Dr. Monroe walked along the quiet streets of Sunset Grove, he marveled at how much had changed in such a short time. The painful memories of harassment had softened into a shared narrative of resilience and community empowerment. With his family's celebration in full swing and the police department working to restore integrity, he felt an overwhelming sense of justice and satisfaction. Dr. Monroe knew that challenges might arise again, but the events of the past weeks had shown that when truth is supported by evidence and a community stands together, even the most intrusive voices will eventually be silenced. As he gazed at the stars over Sunset Grove, he felt grateful, a deep, abiding gratitude for the renewed sense of home, unity, and hope that had emerged from the storm.